Across the wind-swept hills and rugged, salt-sprayed coastlines of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, the veil between our world and the unseen is frayed. This is a landscape sculpted as much by myth as by geology. Here, every mist-shrouded loch, every jagged mountain pass, and every ancient, lichen-covered stone circle serves as a reliquary for forgotten memories. For centuries, the people of these lands spoke in hushed tones of the good neighbors, of entities dwelling in the liminal shadows of the natural world. These are not merely creatures of flesh and bone, but elemental spirits birthed from the deep, whispering woods, the churning, abyssal sea, and the hollowed-out earth of fairy mounds. They are figures woven into the very tapestry of existence, the embodiment of the Celtic people's deepest fears, their boundless sense of wonder, and the ancient wisdom passed down through fireside whispers. Tonight, we drift into that twilight realm to trace the origins of these folkloric beings and listen to the murmurs of a world that pulses just beneath the surface of our own. Our journey begins with a sound that has haunted the Irish countryside for millennia. Imagine a quiet night, the world tucked away under a heavy, obsidian blanket of stars. Suddenly, a cry pierces the silence. It is not the cry of a beast, nor the call of a bird. It is a sound of pure, unearthly sorrow. It is a lament so profound, so gut-wrenchingly absolute, that it seems to carry the cumulative weight of every grief the world has ever known. It rises and falls on the wind, ghosting through the heather, appearing at times to emanate from just outside your window, and at other times to echo from miles away across the desolate bog. This is the keening of the Banshee, the Bean Sidhe. To hear her is to receive a final, grim notification that the thread of a life is being cut. Her name translates to Woman of the Fairy Mounds, a title that anchors her firmly to the ancient, grassy hills that the Irish landscape. These mounds were long whispered to be portals to the otherworld, the ancestral dwelling place of the Tuatha De Danann, the old gods of Ireland who retreated underground as the ages turned. The Banshee is no common spectre. She is a powerful, supernatural herald, a spiritual guardian whose own fate is inextricably tied to the lineages of the ancient Gaelic clans. She is fiercely exclusive in her vigil. She does not weep for the common passerby. Her lament is reserved for those of pure Irish blood, the great families whose names ripple through history like stones cast into a deep well. The Onnells, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, and the McCarthys. In a strange, dark twist of cultural pride, to have a banshee attend one's family was once viewed as a mark of nobility. It signaled that one's lineage was ancient and significant enough to warrant an emissary from the otherworld. Her cry manifests in myriad, terrifying forms. It might strike the ears as a high, jagged shriek, a sound akin to shattering glass that sends dogs into a panicked howl and chills the marrow of the soul. Or, perhaps more hauntingly, it manifests as a low, mournful sob, a melody of heartbreak that feels deeply personal. In some accounts, she is heard singing the keen, the traditional, beautiful, and devastating funeral lament. Her voice weaves a tapestry of sorrow for a loss that hasn't yet occurred, a sonic prophecy of the inevitable. The archives of the Irish Folklore Commission are overflowing with hundreds of sworn testimonies from everyday people. Chilling, intimate accounts from those who heard the cry on the very night a relative passed away, even if that loved one was breathing their last on the opposite side of the globe. Her voice transcends the physical constraints of space, a spiritual announcement that a link in an ancestral chain is about to break. This belief is rooted in the very real, very human practice of keening. In rural Ireland, well into the 19th century, funerals were defined by the Bean Caoint, professional mourning women who would wail, chant, and recount the deeds of the deceased in poetic verse, processing the community's collective trauma. The Banshee is the supernatural apotheosis of this ritual, the first and greatest mourner, beginning the lament before human hearts even grasp that there is a reason to weep. When she is glimpsed, her appearance is famously and maddeningly inconsistent. She might manifest as a pale, ethereal beauty with long, flowing silver hair, draped in a gray cloak, her eyes rimmed in red from centuries of weeping for the dying. Conversely, she may appear as a harrowing old hag, her face a mask of crumpled sorrow, her frame frail and stooped. She is often associated with a golden comb, seen rhythmically drawing it through her tresses as she cries. This association has birthed a widespread folk warning. To find a comb lying on a path or roadside is a grave omen. To pick it up is to invite misfortune, for it belongs to the banshee, and she does not take kindly to those who would steal from her grief. Despite the terror she inspires, the banshee is not a malevolent force. She does not kill. She does not torment. She is a solemn messenger, a figure standing at the liminal threshold between the hearth and the void. Her voice is a final, otherworldly tribute to a passing soul, ensuring that no one of importance slips into the dark without being mourned by the spirits of the land itself. These twin explanations, one rooted in the cold, chemical reality of swamp gas and decaying organic matter, the other in the spectral whispers of folklore, coexist as two distinct lenses through which humanity has attempted to decode the same enigmatic phenomena. The will-o'-the-wisp stands at the precise, flickering intersection of the empirical and the ethereal. It is a place where scientific processes and ancient myth converge in a single, dancing light, serving as a visceral reminder that, for our ancestors, the world was never merely a resource or a topography. Instead, the landscape was alive with hidden intent, imbued with mystery, and marked by a persistent, palpable sense of danger. From the sodden, low-lying bogs, our journey ascends into the mist-drenched, heather-clad highlands of Scotland, a rugged expanse of untamed moors and desolate, wind-scoured cliffs that has birthed countless tales of the uncanny. This is the prowling ground of the Cù-Sìth, a creature of truly formidable and otherworldly stature. This is no mere mortal hound, but a denizen of the otherworld, a herald of the final passage. Standing as large as a yearling bull, it is draped in a shaggy, matted coat of eerie, deep forest green. Its paws, broad as a man's outspread hand, dampen the sound of its movement, and its long tail is often depicted as tightly braided or coiled, a physical manifestation of its supernatural complexity. It was said to traverse the desolate wild with a phantom-like silence, a spectral presence that haunted the loneliest crags. In the lore of the fairy folk, the Cù-Sìth functioned as a guardian, a relentless hunter, and the grim courier of mortality. The Cù-Sìth was a harbinger to be feared with a primal intensity. To glimpse its verdant form was an undeniable decree that a soul was soon to be summoned across the veil. It acted as a psychopomp, a dark guide navigating the transition between the living and the dead. Yet, its method of signaling an arrival was a process of calculated, ritualistic terror. For the most part, the great hound moved in an unnerving total silence. But periodically, it would halt, raise its massive head toward the heavens, and unleash a series of exactly 3 thunderous, bone-shaking barks. These were not the sounds of a creature tethered to the natural world. They were described as having a preternatural volume and reach, vibrating across miles of rugged terrain, audible even to mariners laboring on vessels far out in the churning sea. For any unfortunate soul wandering the wilds, the first bark was the starting gun of a desperate, life-or-death race. The folklore is chillingly specific regarding the rules of this hunt. You were compelled to reach the sanctuary of a human dwelling, a home or a stone-walled settlement, before the third and final bark faded into the mist. To be caught out in the open, vulnerable and exposed, after that third sound was to be struck dead not by a claw or a fong, but by the sheer, unadulterated force of psychic terror, your sole forfeit to the fairy host. This ritualistic countdown forged a dramatic, agonizing tension, a literal race for survival that reinforced the boundary between the wild, chaotic supernatural domain of the moor and the protected, fire-lit world of human community. The hound's distinctive green pelt marked it indelibly as a creature of the Sith, existing entirely outside the mortal sphere. Its grim purpose tapped into a profound Gaelic anxiety, the fear of being caught solitary, unshielded, and far from the safety of kin and hearth. While the Cù-Sìth belongs to a wider European tradition of spectral hounds, from the black dogs of English legend to the Welsh Gwyn ap Nudd and his otherworldly pack, it remains unique. Its specific verdant coloring and its deadly, rhythmic vocalizations set it apart. It is not an unthinking monster, but an entity with a solemn, terrifying mandate. A servant of the otherworld, tasked with the collection of human spirits. It stands as an unforgettable symbol of the wild, untamable, and occasionally lethal spirit of the Scottish Highlands. Our path now carries us back to Ireland, to the lush, rain-softened landscapes of County Waterford, to unearth a tale that resonates with a chillingly modern resonance through its themes of betrayal, love, and agonizing retribution. This is the legend of the Dearg Due, the red bloodsucker, a figure who has solidified her place as the quintessential Irish vampire. The narrative, as whispered in modern parlance, focuses on a beautiful young woman who lived centuries ago near the site now identified as Strongbow's Tree. She had pledged her heart to a local peasant boy, their love a secret bloom in the landscape of their youth. But her father was a man consumed by avarice and cold ambition. Deaf to his daughter's desperate pleas, he bartered her away into an arranged marriage with a wealthy, notoriously cruel local chieftain, trading her life for a fortune in land and gold. Her existence quickly withered into a prison of misery. Her husband, a man of brutal impulses, was both consumed by jealousy of her beauty and deeply resentful of her unconcealed sorrow. He locked her away in a damp, isolated tower, severing her connection to the world and to every source of light and joy. Deprived of her true love and subjected to relentless, systematic cruelty, she refused to take sustenance. She wasted away until death claimed her, a tragedy of a heart shattered by grief. She was interred in a lonely, forgotten churchyard. But her suffering was far too profound, and her thirst for vengeance too volatile to be contained by the cold earth. On the first anniversary of her death, she clawed her way back from the grave, a revenant consumed by a singular, burning hunger, a hunger for the vitality and blood that had been violently stolen from her. Her initial acts of retribution were directed at the architects of her ruin. She sought out her cruel husband and her greedy father, draining them until they were nothing more than empty, lifeless husks. Yet her thirst proved insatiable. From that night onward, she would rise from her tomb to weaponize the exquisite beauty that had been her undoing in life. She haunted the pathways, luring unsuspecting young men into the shadows before feeding on their lifeblood, a cycle of predation born from the agony of her past. The legend maintains that the only way to anchor her restless spirit is to pile a heavy cairn of stones upon her grave every year, leaving offerings of flowers as a gesture of remembrance, a plea to appease the tortured soul that lingers beneath the soil. While this narrative remains immensely popular today, a cornerstone of ghost tours and cultural history, its claim to be a continuous, ancient tradition is hotly debated by folklorists. Verifiable, early attestations of the Dearg Due story are notoriously elusive. Many scholars argue that the tale as we know it is a 19th century synthesis, potentially influenced by the broader European vampire craze that swept through Victorian literature and Gothic obsession. It is critical to distinguish her story from that of Apartak, an Irish revenant whose history is far better documented in antiquity. Apartak was a tyrannical dwarf king who, upon being slain, repeatedly rose from his grave to demand bowls of blood from his terror-stricken subjects. Though both are now categorized as vampires, the Dearg Due story, with its evocative layers of tragic love and feminine vengeance, is the one that has truly seized the modern imagination. It proves that folklore is never a static relic. It is a living, breathing tradition that evolves, perpetually crafting new monsters to mirror our timeless, universal sorrows. We shift our focus now, turning from the individual spirits that haunt the lonely fringes of the landscape to the primal deities and ancient beings who were said to have waged war for dominion over the land itself. To comprehend the essence of Irish mythology, one must first understand the epic, world-shaping conflict between two titanic races, the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians. The narrative commences with the Tuatha Dé Danann in a state of terminal decline. Their king, Nuada, had been maimed, losing his arm in a previous skirmish. Because the kingship required physical perfection, he was forced to abdicate. In a disastrous political maneuver, the throne was ceded to Bress, a prince of mixed heritage, his mother a goddess of the Tuatha Dé, his father a Fomorian king. Bress' reign proved to be a catastrophe. He was a petty, unjust tyrant who imposed crushing levies and forced the noble gods of the Tuatha Dé into humiliating manual labor. Under his oppressive rule, the Fomorians ascended to absolute power, and the people of Danu were brought to their knees. Yet, this dark hour set the stage for the rise of a champion. The physician Dien sect fashioned a miraculous, functioning silver arm for Nuada, restoring his physical completeness and, by extension, his legitimacy to lead. Simultaneously, a new hero appeared at the gates of Terra, a young warrior named Luff. Luff was a master of every craft imaginable, from metallurgy and poetry to warfare and the highest forms of sorcery, earning him the epithet Samaldanac, or the master of all arts. Crucially, he too carried Fomorian blood, his mother being the daughter of the fearsome Fomorian champion, Baelor. Luff's arrival electrified the spirits of the Tuatha Dé, and he assumed command of the rebellion against Fomorian hegemony. The conflict culminated in a final, cataclysmic clash on the plain of Mag Twyard. It was here that Luff confronted his own grandfather, the most dread figure of the Fomorian host, Baelor of the Evil Eye. Baelor possessed a single, immense, and toxic eye. Its gaze was so lethal that it remained shuttered, requiring 4 attendants to lever the heavy, gnarled lid open during battle. When exposed, its gaze unleashed pure destruction, capable of withering entire legions. As the heat of the battle reached its zenith and Baelor's attendants labored to reveal the eye, Luff acted with surgical precision. In a mythic inversion of the evil eye legends found throughout global folklore, he drew his sling and launched a stone with such unfathomable force and perfect trajectory that it struck Baelor's eye, driving it entirely out the back of his head. The eye's devastating, toxic energy was redirected onto the Fomorian ranks behind their commander, shattering their lines and securing a final, decisive victory for the Tuatha Dé Danann. Following this, their reign was secure until the arrival of mortals, the Milesians. Rather than endure a protracted, existential war, the Tuatha Dé Danann utilized their profound magic to retreat from the physical world, sinking into the hollow hills and the secret, liminal folds of the landscape, slowly transmuting into the Ouse Sea, the powerful and often volatile fairy folk of later tradition. After the great gods withdrew from the mortal sphere, it was said that the skies above the Celtic lands became the province of other, far more harrowing hosts. Across the highlands of Scotland and into the heart of Ireland, the people whispered of the Sluagh, the host of the unforgiven dead. These were not ghosts in the traditional mournful sense. They were a terrifying airborne procession, a tempestuous flock comprised of the most sinful, restless souls that heaven, hell, and the earth itself had rejected. Having been denied rest in any realm, they were condemned to wander the firmament for eternity, a force of pure, distilled malice. They were frequently cited as a roiling dark cloud, a chaotic murmuration of blackbirds, or a shadowy, drifting mass silhouetted against the twilight sky. Their passage was invariably marked by a sudden, freezing wind and the sound of strange, agonizing cries echoing from the heavens. Belief in the Sluagh was deeply woven into the Highland tradition of second sight, the supposed ability of gifted individuals to perceive the spiritual currents beneath reality. Seers would describe haunting visions of funeral processions or the replay of phantom battles, particularly above sites of historical carnage like Culloden. The Sluagh were perceived as a fearsome component of the Unseelie Court, the darker, malevolent faction of the fairy world. They were whispered to be most active during the year's liminal transitions, particularly at Samhain, when the barrier between worlds grew thin as gossamer. An encounter with the Sluagh was a perilous, sanity-shattering ordeal. They were notorious for snatching unsuspecting mortals who dared to venture out alone at night, lifting them high into the dark, churning air. Sometimes they would carry these victims for miles, subjecting them to a harrowing aerial traversal before dropping them, battered and traumatized, in distant, unfamiliar lands. It was said they attempted to strike mortals with elf-shot arrows, and that they possessed a particular, predatory hunger for the souls of those currently on their deathbeds. In many corners of the Highlands, it became a rigid, ingrained custom to seal all west-facing windows and doors the moment a soul began its final descent, for the Sluagh were believed to travel from the west, seeking to breach the home and steal the departing soul before it could find peace. The legend of the Sluagh provided a visceral, folkloric explanation for a spectrum of phenomena. A sudden, violent gust of wind on an otherwise placid night, the panicked swirling of starlings in the twilight, or an eerie, unidentifiable wail carried on a breeze could all be attributed to the passing of the host. Their story served as a stern, unyielding warning against venturing out into the night's embrace. More profoundly, it mapped a geography of communal sorrow and sin onto the sky itself. The Sluagh were a constant, mobile reminder of the unquiet dead, a celestial army of the damned whose presence was an omen of impending ruin and an omnipresent threat to the living. While some terrors arrived on the gale, others lurked in the icy, inscrutable, and deceptively still waters of the Welsh lakes. In those silent depths, a fearsome, primeval entity was said to dwell, the Afanc. The creature's appearance was a subject of immense regional variation, a testament to its deep, mycelial roots in local lore, with each community projecting its unique anxieties into the murky water. In some traditions, it was described as a beaver of monstrous proportions, its teeth capable of shearing through stone. In others, it manifested as a scaly, crocodilian predator of the abyss. Still others spoke of a dark, demonic entity with no consistent shape, a living personification of the crushing pressure and bone-numbing cold of the deep water. Whatever its form, it was an engine of destruction, blamed for obliterating fishing nets, capsizing vessels and dragging livestock, and the occasional unfortunate human, to a watery grave. Its fury was said to be the source of catastrophic, flash flooding, capable of drowning entire valleys in a single wrathful surge. Several Welsh lakes are still whispered to be the Afanc's lair, including Elowyan Llewellyn, Elowyan Yr Afanc, and Elowyan Barfog. Two primary legends detail how this menace was finally neutralized. In the first and most widespread version, the creature is too resilient, its hide impenetrable to any blade or spear. Consequently, it must be relocated. The tale speaks of a maiden whose innocence and ethereal beauty lull the monstrous creature into a deep slumber, its massive, grotesque head resting in her lap. While it dreams, a cadre of heroes secures it with unbreakable iron chains. It is then harnessed to the mighty team of oxen belonging to the mythological hero Hu Gadarn, or, in varying accounts, the war horses of King Arthur. The effort required to haul the beast from its watery domain is so monumental that one of the oxen's hooves is said to have gouged a lasting mark into solid stone. A landmark known today as Carn March Arthur, the stone of Arthur's horse. As the Afanc is dragged away to be imprisoned in a remote, landlocked lake, its roars of fury are so harrowing that the maiden who had tamed it is frightened to death on the spot. In a second, more martial strand of the legend found in the Mabinogion, the Knight Peredur accepts the task of slaying the Afanc. He secures a magical stone that renders him invisible. With this advantage, he is able to infiltrate the creature's cavernous lair unseen, bypassing its formidable defenses to slay it with his blade, liberating the land from its terror for eternity. The Afanc serves as a masterful example of how folklore concentrates the very real, environmental dangers of a landscape into a single mythic adversary. The deep, frigid lakes of Snowdonia, prone to sudden shifts in temperature and treacherous currents, presented a lethal reality to locals. The Afanc gave a name, a shape, and a face to that peril, binding communal memory to specific landmarks and serving as an enduring, powerful warning to any who dared approach the water's edge. Not every aquatic omen was a monster of violence. Some were sorrowful, quiet, and assumed a human, though not entirely humane, form. In the Scottish Highlands, near the banks of isolated streams and secluded river fords, a solitary, unsettling figure could occasionally be discerned. This was the Bean-Nigh, the little washerwoman of the ford. She is a close kinswoman to the Irish Banshee, and like her, she is a harbinger of the end. However, her method of prophecy is a deeply personal, chillingly mundane ritual. She is invariably encountered alone, hunched in concentration, washing the blood-stained garments or burial shrouds of those whose lives are about to reach their conclusion. To stumble upon her at her gruesome task is to receive an absolute, terrifying confirmation that a death within the community is imminent. If the shroud she is scrubbing is small, it portends the passing of a child. Her appearance is often grotesque, a deliberate hallmark of her unearthly origin. Accounts vary, but she is commonly described as having a single, wide nostril, one large protruding tooth, webbed digits, and unnaturally elongated breasts that hang so low she is forced to throw them over her shoulders to keep them clear of the water as she works. These distressing traits emphasize her supernatural nature. The site of her vigil, the ford, is a location of profound symbolic importance in Celtic tradition. It is a liminal geography, a threshold between one bank and another, a place of crossing. Encountering her, there is a signal that another, more final, crossing is about to occur. A meeting with the Bean-Nigh was a perilous encounter governed by a strict, archaic set of rules. If one saw her before she became aware of their presence, the individual could potentially seize the advantage. The tradition holds that if you could stealthily maneuver between her and the water, she was magically bound to your will. She was compelled to answer 3 questions truthfully and grant 3 wishes. She could also be approached as the child of a foster mother, a specific invocation that would prompt her to share her dark, occult knowledge. If, however, she caught sight of you first, the encounter was an omen of your own impending demise or catastrophic misfortune. The Bean-Nigh is a complex, tragic figure. She is the ghost of a woman who died in childbirth, condemned to wash the linens of the dying until the day her natural lifespan would have concluded. She represents fate, not as a grand, abstract destiny, but as a domestic, inescapable chore. Death, in her weary hands, is a pile of dirty laundry that must be cleaned, a final, practical act of preparation. Her presence transmutes a simple, flowing stream into a place of harrowing significance, a boundary line that will soon be crossed, not by foot, but by the final, silent journey of a human soul. Sometimes, the omen was not a shriek in the night or a grotesque vision, but a silent, watchful, and constant presence within a site of power. On the Isle of Man, at the ancient and formidable Peel Castle, which stands isolated on its own rocky islet, generations of soldiers whispered the story of a terrifying spectral guardian, the Dearg Due. The name, in the Manx Gaelic tongue, translates simply to black dog. The legend describes a massive, shaggy, coal-black hound that haunted the castle corridors, a presence of silent, intimidating gravity. The earliest and most detailed account of the Dearg Due hails from George Waldron's 18th century description of the Isle of Man. According to the lore, the great black dog would materialize at twilight, emerging from a dark, foreboding passage that connected to the private apartments of the captain of the guard. It would then traverse the halls in silence, entering the guard room to lie by the hearth, its eyes glowing with a faint, embers-like light in the dimness. The soldiers, though gripped by profound terror, eventually grew accustomed to its nightly, chilling vigil. However, their fear remained so potent that none would ever volunteer to be the last to leave the guard room alone at night. A specific, nerve-wracking ritual defined their duties. The castle keys had to be locked away and then carried to the captain's quarters, a route that forced the carrier to pass directly by the entrance to the haunted passage from which the dog emerged. The soldier tasked with this duty would invariably demand a partner, as none dared navigate that corridor alone in the dark. One night, a soldier, emboldened by heavy drinking, began to mock his comrades, ridiculing their fear of what he dismissed as a mere beast. Fueled by drunken bravado, he snatched the keys, swearing he would deliver them alone, daring the Dearg Due to reveal itself. He stormed out into the oppressive darkness, but moments later, the remaining guards were paralyzed by a series of horrific, unearthly screams echoing from the haunted passage. The soldier stumbled back into the guard room shortly after, his face a mask of absolute, speechless terror. He was utterly unable to form words to describe what he had witnessed in the dark, and he died 3 days later in agonizing convulsions, his body broken by an encounter with the unseen. After that final, harrowing encounter, the Dearg Due vanished from the castle's stone corridors as if he had never been more than a shadow cast by a flickering torch. The haunted passage, long plagued by the hound's spectral presence, was sealed shut with iron-hard brick and mortar, effectively entombing the secret behind the masonry. The tale, later immortalized by the literary prowess of Sir Walter Scott, solidified the Manx ghost hound as a cornerstone of British folklore, an eternal sentinel of the unseen. The Dearg Due serves as a quintessential guardian of the threshold, a silent, implacable enforcer who demands reverence for the mysteries that lie just beyond human perception. He stands as a formidable reminder that even within the fortified walls of a human stronghold, there exist spiritual and physical boundaries that no mortal, regardless of their station, should ever dare to transgress. We now turn our gaze toward the verdant fields and humble farmsteads of Northern Ireland, where the pulse of the earth beats a different rhythm. Here, far removed from the ethereal courts of the city, dwelt a helper spirit of a drastically different character, the Grogach. The Grogach was a small, stout creature of immense, unkempt vigor, densely covered from head to toe in a coarse, matted pelt of reddish-brown or tan hair. He appeared less like a spirit and more like a sentient, walking fragment of the forest floor, adorned with a perennial patina of damp twigs, forest loam, and dried leaves, the result of a total, steadfast refusal to ever bathe. The Grogach was the embodiment of raw, rustic utility. Unlike the aloof and aristocratic Cù-Sìth, the Grogach sought the company of the working class. He possessed an uncanny, selective invisibility, appearing only to those he deemed worthy of his presence. He would attach himself to a particular household, acting as a silent, unseen laborer who thrived on the repetitive, grounding cycles of agricultural life. Whether it was threshing grain in the barn, herding stubborn cattle through the mist, or assisting with the autumn harvest, his contribution was a profound blessing to any farmer lucky enough to host him. However, his services came with a rigid, non-negotiable code of ethics. The Grogach held an intense disdain for vanity and human excess. He expected nothing more for his tireless toil than a simple bowl of fresh cream or a portion of porridge left on the hearth. To offer him clothes or financial wages was to commit a grave, unforgivable insult. Such an act was viewed as a fundamental misunderstanding of their symbiotic relationship, and the moment a family attempted to pay him, the Grogach would vanish forever, leaving the farm to its own devices. He was the moral anchor of the farm, a spirit who rewarded humility and generosity, yet evaporated the instant pride or commerce tainted the sanctity of his labor. From the earthy fields, we transition to the lonely, melancholic landscapes of the Irish countryside, where a far more sinister figure awaits the unwary traveler, the Gankener. His name, derived from the Irish Gan Canach, translates to love talker. He is a male fairy defined by 3 distinct attributes: a profound, indolent nature, a face of devastating, supernatural beauty, and a voice that could intoxicate the soul. Typically seen lounging against a stile or wandering the roadside with a dudeen, a traditional clay pipe, clamped between his teeth, his entire existence is dedicated to the enchantment of mortal women. The Gankener is a master of the silver tongue. To fall under his gaze is to feel like the absolute center of his universe. Yet, his affection is as fleeting as a summer gale. After a whirlwind courtship of whispered promises and stolen kisses, the gankener invariably vanishes, leaving his victim in a state of ruinous despair. This is no mere heartbreak. It is a supernatural affliction, a fairy pining, that causes the victim to waste away, her health failing as she consumes herself with an inconsolable, magical longing for the lover who has abandoned her. He serves as a timeless, sobering warning against the dangers of vanity and the peril of believing in promises as ephemeral as smoke. In the mist-choked marshes of Snowdonia, Wales, the terrors of the deep took on a truly grotesque form. Fishermen braving the dark waters spoke in hushed tones of the water leaper. This creature was a chaotic, organic nightmare, essentially a giant, legless amphibian, but possessed of leathery, bat-like wings that served not for flight, but to propel it in terrifying, gargantuan bounds across the water's surface. Its monstrous form was capped by a long, lizard-like tail tipped with a lethal, venomous barb. The water leaper was the bane of the Welsh fishermen. It delighted in snapping lines, overturning small skiffs, and dragging the unlucky into the frigid depths of the lakes. It was the physical embodiment of the sudden, inexplicable disasters that claimed lives on the water, a manifestation of the malice hidden beneath the surface. Even the great folklorist Sir John Rhys recorded accounts from Gwynedd of men who swore their ancestors had witnessed this nightmare firsthand, confirming it as a creature born from the very real, primal fears of those who made their living on the edge of the abyss. We conclude by venturing into the ancient mythological heart of Ireland, to the cave of the cats at Cruachan. It was here that the dread Ellen Trechand was said to emerge on the Feast of Samhain. A three-headed monster of apocalyptic proportions, Ellen Trechand was a living engine of ruin. Whether its heads represented famine, blight, and fire, or were manifestations of swarms of poisonous birds, its purpose was clear: to undo the order of the human realm. Only the hero Amergin, a master of poetic and martial arts, was capable of confronting this primordial chaos. The story is a quintessential combat myth, illustrating the eternal, fragile struggle between civilization and the raw, unbridled forces of the void that wait, just out of sight, for the light to fade. From the king of the cats, a mysterious sovereign who reveals his power in a single, chilling instant, to the solemn, haunting presence of the Banshee, these figures are the guardians of our collective psyche. They are the shadows cast by our own history, the warnings etched into the landscape, and the eternal keepers of the secrets that linger in the quiet, dark corners of our world. As the boundaries between the mundane and the magical grow thin, we are reminded that in every unexplained sound or sudden chill, the old world is still watching, waiting in the periphery of our modern lives.